So shall we take the roll?
The roll has been taken.
Thank you. So we'll just go over rules of procedure to begin with. The Brantford Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting is now called to order. To begin with, we'll go over the rules of procedure. This meeting is held in hybrid format in accordance with the electronic participation policy for virtual meetings. The full corporate policy 050 regarding electronic virtual meetings is available online to review. My apologies, I've got a bit of a frog in my throat today. Staff and delegates are reminded to keep their video and microphones off until requested by the chair or members of the committee. Oh, I'm sorry. All cameras for committee members shall remain on to ensure quorum. Members of the committee shall indicate they wish to speak by physically raising their hand. Members who are present in person will be given the opportunity to speak first, followed by virtual participants. All members of the committee will vote by a physical show of hands. Please leave your hand raised until the chair has determined the result of the vote. In the event a connection or service interruption occurs that affects quorum, we may recess the meeting for up to 15 minutes to regain quorum. If quorum is not achieved, the meeting will be adjourned. All rules for delegation under the city's procedural bylaw continue to apply. So we'll move on to number 2 on your agenda. Are there any declarations of conflict of interest on any of the items listed on your agenda? Seeing none, we'll go on to number 3. Presentations. We do have one correction. We have one presentation before us today. And I'd like to introduce Monica Harl Maxwell from Vidas Architects. And if you would, Monica, please.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to be here to present this very exciting project to you. It's a brand new secondary school for the Brant-Haldimand-Norfolk Catholic District School Board, as well as an attached childcare center that will comprise 2 infant rooms, 4 toddler rooms, and 2 preschool rooms. The high school is approximately 155,000 square feet. It's a 2-story building. It will be strongly focused on technology and getting the next generation of students ready for the 21st century. The school is located on Powerline Road. Our westerly entrance into the site is lined up with Old Farm Road, south of Powerline Road. As mentioned before, this is a vacant lot at the moment. Due to this development coming prior to the rest of the residential access, as well as the future northern neighborhood collector road that's slated to be completed sometime in the future. We have provided a ring road around the site so that you enter on the west hand side. You can proceed all the way around the site, and then you can come right out on Powerline Road again and make a right out onto that power line again. This is to help with construction to alleviate congestion on Powerline Road, but also to take into consideration future power line widening, so you have an alternate entrance into the site if one will be required. There is a kiss and ride for the students. There's a generous bus drop-off loop. We have accessible parking located at the main entrances, 2 for the childcare. Then we have 6 accessible spots, type A and type B, 50% each, near the entrance to the school, the main entrance. And the main entrance to the school is actually located from the rear of the site, which faces the sports field. There will be depressed curbs at all key crossing areas. Where we can, we will, instead of even having depressed curbs, keep the sidewalk at the same height. So you're not going up and down. That specifically is on the easterly side near the loading zone area. There will be accessible push buttons at the main entrances into the building, both for the school as well as the child care center. And we've provided a couple of accessible spots off of the easterly driveway. And that is with the consideration that you may have staff who might be teaching in that wing. So we provided a shorter entrance for them into that wing. Trying to think if there's anything else. The bus loop is located in such a way that I do understand that there is an accessibility bus that City of Brantford partners up with that could park in the school bus zone area as well. And we're trying to keep the majority of the site as level as possible.
Sorry. Just for clarification purposes, Monica just presented, which was our number 4.2 on our agenda, the site plan control application for St. Padre Pio Catholic Secondary School on Powerline Road. Do we have any questions for Monica at this time? Yes.
I'm sorry if you mentioned it, but are there any elevators in the school?
There is a full-size elevator, not a Lula, in the school, and it's located near the main entrance.
Okay, thank you.
You mentioned type A and type B.
Correct.
What does that mean? I don't know.
It means the size of a parking spot. Type B, I believe, is 3.4 meters wide, and type A is 3.4, and the other one's 2.8. And then they have a 1.5 meter wide area where you cannot park.
Oh, okay.
So,
Okay.
Are there any more questions?
It looks like somebody's got their hand raised electronically.
Yes, Councillor Hunt, please.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, to Monica. So I'm looking at the actual site plan. You had indicated that the accessible parking spots are located near the entrance, which is at the rear of the building where the sport field is. I'm just trying to, from the orientation of the building, which is the large oval on the, would be the northeast side of the property. So where is the sport field orientated? Is it the rectangle directly behind?
So the sport field is the giant oval shape. That is the 8-lane track. And then you have the sports fields in between. And then you have the entrances into the school. There is a stairwell as well near the main entrance. I'm just trying to help you locate yourself around the building. And then I'm not sure if your drawings identify the room names on that site plan or not.
No, this is so the site plan. So I'm sorry. I thought the large portion was the actual school. So that is the sport field.
The one, so at the top of the site, if your site is if power line's at the bottom.
Yep.
I mean, you're drawing, okay, so power line's at the bottom. The sports field is up at the top, located at an angle.
Yes.
And then the building is between the sports field and power line road. It's rectangular angled building. For the most part, in a more of a elongated rectangular shape.
Okay, so and it's just it's probably just me, so I see what looks to be a looped driveway, and the accessible parking stalls are at the edge of the at the edge of the loop driveway. So you would go either into the school or to the sport field from those
Yes,
parking stalls. Is that correct?
yes.
Okay. And then I see it looks to be two that are immediately outside the daycare center when you come in the westerly driveway. So you
Correct.
drive in the driveway, turn right, in those two spots for the daycare center are located right there.
That's right.
Okay, all right, thank you.
And again, my apologies. I should have asked for a mover and a seconder to put this on the floor for questions. Could I have a mover, please? Yes, Madison. And seconder, please? Yes. Thank you so much. Any further discussion or questions? Thank you, Monica. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Really careful.
Regarding the report.
Do we have any questions for staff regarding this report?
Power line road in front of the school, is that going to be widened to 4 lanes?
Yes.
Madam Chair, Joe Muto, Manager of Development Planning, planner responsible for having initiated citywide amendment for this, or city-initiated amendment rezoning official plans for the subject lands. Lands that were previously owned by the city, and that's why we took that initiative. Through that process and through all of the settlement area boundary expansions, there's been some opportunity and investigation to looking at what major roads should be upgraded, and power line is now on the docket. It's got an environmental assessment that's been carried forward through the public works staff. There's obviously some time that they'll need to do the assessments, both from a sanitary infrastructure perspective as well as environmental, to widen that road for the future development of all those lands in the power line central block plan.
Is that from King George to Park Road?
That will be for the
Or just immediately in front
no,
of the school?
that will continue for most of that power line area from basically Wayne Gretzky Parkway all the way to, I think, Oak Park Road.
Okay, I have other questions, but that's not concerning us.
Okay.
Thank you.
So maybe, Madam Chair, just to elaborate on why Monica is here today, this was an item that was flagged by the city's accessibility advisor, Jenny, who's on the call. We brought this forward. What is really being contemplated at this time is the site plan application that's been submitted by the school board in Monica and her firm and consultants for their client, who is the school board. Monica has recently submitted a second submission, trying to address all the comments that came out of the first submission, so that the planning department could advance and finalize the site plan so as to hit the school board deadlines with regards to getting that shovel in the ground and building this by the deadline that's been established, not only by that, but by the provincial agencies to get the school built. Okay.
Thank you. Sorry?
You can call it vote if staff.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm over here sleeping. Okay, I'm going to call the question then. All those in favor of what we've just heard? And those opposed?
Is that a motion?
There's a motion in the
Yes,
report, yeah,
Oh.
so that it's received and that if there was any questions to be forwarded to staff. Or sorry, any comments.
Sorry, the confusion is mine. I'm just not up to snuff today.
So the motion's on the bottom of that front page there and carries over to the back of that page.
That's a motion?
Yeah.
I guess I'm not very familiar with your paperwork.
Yeah.
I don't-
So it's basically
It
just that.
It doesn't say it's a motion.
It's that this report is to be received and that the following comments, if we had any as a committee, to provide to staff. Is there any official comments that you would like to?
Well, I'm fine with that.
Okay,
Okay, once again, I'll ask for a mover. Who is the mover?
it was Madison.
Thank you, Madison. And a seconder, please. Yes, thank you very much. All those in favor? Any opposed? And that is carried.
Thank you, Monica, for attending. If we are done that report, if you want to. Or you can head out.
Thank you, Mom.
Best place in the house. Thank you. Oh.
Thank you so much. Okay, we'll go on to 4.1, items for consideration. There are 2 items for consideration on today's agenda. 4.1, new zoning bylaw project, draft zoning bylaw, November 2023, number 2024-187. I'll ask staff to come forward and provide the overview for this.
Awesome.
Over here. Just gonna get a little presentation started here. I think the consider.
Page back there.
Oh, yeah.
There we go.
Can you guys see the presentation virtually? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Did you want to put the presentation on the screen so that everyone
Oh.
else here can see it as well? That's okay. So if you go back, close that up there, and then if you throw that up over there. Yeah.
Where'd it go now?
It's okay.
Sorry, technical difficulties.
Pull that up there. And then if you go to your Zoom, so if you hit, here, may I drive for a second?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no problem.
Sorry.
Okay. So if we go back to the top, slideshow, and we hit play. That's why. Seems to be wanting to play it on this screen over here. I'm going to bring it back over here 1 second. There we go. And now we'll pull this up and we'll go share screen and then share screen. Share. Can everyone see the presentation now? Everyone's good?
Yeah.
Everyone here is good?
We
Okay.
can see it, but it is in presenter mode. Do you care?
When you say it's in presenter mode,
I can see if there's any notes, we can see those. And we've got the whole panel along the side with the different slides and then the main one.
yeah, not ideal there.
Share.
Sure.
How's that, Jenny?
Any different?
That is better. It's the single slide.
Okay.
Awesome. Okay, so good afternoon, Chair and committee members. My name is Joshua Scram. I'm a senior long-range planner and lead on the city zoning bylaw project. With me today virtually, I have a long-range planner, Miranda Ivany, also assisting with the zoning bylaw project. We're really excited to be here As part of our traveling roadshow, we have made it to a number of committees and stakeholder groups and really engaged in, some really good dialogue. Obviously, specific to each committee, there's different interests. So really appreciate everyone's time here today. Really excited to share this document with you. We're replacing a document that's over 30 years old. 160-90 is our current zoning bylaw. And while it's a great document, it's been amended hundreds of times. This new document definitely brings us into the modern era. It's a streamlined, very concise document that we're really excited about. And I hope you had an opportunity to review it. So today for the presentation, I'll kind of walk you through the project in a nutshell, the phase 1 all the way to phase 5 and where we hope to be in June. We'll go through what a zoning bylaw is and what it does. Then I'll talk about accessibility. So I'll pull out some of the sections of the zoning bylaw that are relative when we talk about accessibility and some of the standards that this group is really interested in. And then Miranda, my colleague, is going to walk you through our interactive mapping. So we have some interactive mapping now, which is new to the city. You can go in there, you can punch in your address, you can go to a specific property, and there's additional resources when you do that you can click on and see the zones and some of the provisions that are specific to that property, okay? So if you come over to this screen, in the bottom corner, there's some arrows. If you go this way, there's an arrow on this side. Perfect. So as an overview, the City of Brantford's new zoning bylaw project, it's really focused on establishing a new zoning bylaw that will regulate all lands within the City of Brantford. And this includes the former county lands that were annexed to the city in 2017. So it'll implement the city's new official plan and provide specific direction about what can occur on a property. So for example, what uses are allowed, the height and size of buildings, and parking and landscaping requirements. So the project, as I mentioned, includes several phases. The previous phase was the strategic directions report. And really what that report did was it utilized the discussion papers and all the findings from our public consultation activities to really set the structure for the new zoning bylaw, right? So that blueprint. So we're now in phase 5 where we've used that strategic directions report, as I mentioned, as a blueprint and drafted a comprehensive zoning bylaw, which was released for public review on December 4th of last year. Next slide, please. So talking about the zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw, as I mentioned, outlines how lands is regulated in the city of Brantford in conformity with the land use designations of our official plan. So that official plan was approved and really in effect as of August 2020. The zoning bylaw establishes various zones and determines how land can be used within those areas. As I mentioned, it includes things like what's permitted and where buildings and structures can be located. It regulates aspects of development, right? We talked about height, size of buildings, size of yards. We talk about, the front yard, the side yard, rear yard setbacks, as well as parking and landscaping requirements. And so while it's really important to talk about what the zoning bylaw does, I also want to mention, it's a really effective regulatory tool, whether it's planners, whether it's our building department, staff citywide, developers, we're all going to be using this really great tool. There are some things that it does not regulate: the internal design of buildings, the design of streetscapes, parks and public spaces, things like the construction techniques that are used for a building. The zoning bylaw does not get into those, right? We have other documents at our disposal that are really good in terms of tools or recommendations that guide those things. One of the things that comes to my mind is our urban design guideline. Really great document, but that's a little bit different than the zoning bylaw. So next slide, please. It's okay. So in terms of our new zoning bylaw, just a quick overview. These are the chapters that we have 14 sections. Again, it's a really streamlined document in comparison to the document that we have, 160-90. Again, that document's well over 30 years old. So modernizing this document, giving it a new look. And I'll share some examples on the next slide here. We can pan over. So starting with the user guide, this is really important for us. It's something we're really proud of with this new document. The user guide, so sections 1 and 2, this is really where if it's, an everyday user or somebody who just wants to jump in and understand the zoning of our property, we're going to land here and this is going to describe to us, how do I read this document? How do I find relevant information? It really guides the reader through the process of finding out information about a particular property. It gives guidance on maps and symbols and some of the abbreviations. So, we might have a zone that is called the intensification corridor. Well, when we look at the map, that zone's going to have the letters IC. So it's going to guide us, tell us how to understand it. You'll see here on the right side, I know that the participants that are on Zoom are covering it a little bit, but really that is a big component of this new zoning bylaw. It has a lot of visual aids that guide us. So it doesn't necessarily tell us the exact prescription that we're going to get from some of the provisions, but these images help guide us through the document. There might be a definition, and we'll talk about the definition section in a minute here. In the definitions, we might have a description for what is a townhouse. So it'll say, a townhouse is X, Y, and Z, but it'll also have an image beside it. So I can visually understand it as well, along with the text. It's going to give me some helpful cues in terms of understanding that. So on the next slide, I just provide a quick overview of the zone categories. So again, going back to, a more modern look, the zoning bylaw has been condensed in terms of the zones. There's 22 categories here on the screen, ranging from mixed use to residential, institutional, commercial, employment, agricultural, core natural, open space, and development zone. So really what we're looking at here is we're implementing the city's official plan, and we're also creating additional layers, right? So the official plan, again, it's an overarching document that identifies land use. Now we're talking about the zoning bylaw. This is a tool that's going to regulate aspects of development kind of at that micro level, the specific property. If we were to draw a property boundary, we're going to focus in specifically on what we can do within those boundaries. And so that's just a quick summary of those 22 categories. Now, when we talk about sections 4 and 5, the draft zoning bylaw, I really wanted to highlight these for the committee. Specifically definitions, when we talk about format and function, one of the cool things about our new zoning bylaw is any term that is defined. So if I was to open up this document and I'm reading it, I'm going to see different words that are going to have that strong font or bold, right? And that tells me that that's a defined term. So if I'm looking at accessible, for example, that's going to be bolded throughout this document. And I know as a reader that I can go back to section 4, which is definitions, and know that that's going to be a defined term. And it's going to be something that I can use to interpret that, right? Because a lot of times the zoning bylaw, whether it's an everyday user or a consultant or a member of a legal team, they need to interpret the definition to understand what it actually means. So it's a really big, important piece for us. And that's one component that I just wanted to draw everyone's attention to. Working with Jenny, we do have a definition for accessible, right? So when we're talking about accessible, what does it mean? What are the guidelines and provincial regulations that we're going to rely on when we define accessible, right? Next, section 5. I think that this section is really important when we're talking about accessibility, right? Parking and loading regulations. So what is accessible parking? What does it mean? We actually heard the consultant when we're talking about the high school site talking about type A and type B. You had asked the question. So what does that mean? What are the regulations, right? So if we're talking about type A, we're talking about a length of 5.6 meters, a width of 3.4, and then that access aisle, mentioned the 1.5, right? Versus a type B, right? So those are all really important. We also have additional wording when we talk about accessible parking. Some of the things that are important to us when we talk about signage, when we talk about, delineation, and making sure that we're, meeting the standards that are in some of the documents that we have, the FADS document, but also the Ontario Human Rights Code, the Accessibility for Ontario with Disabilities. All of the standards we're really trying to incorporate into this bylaw, and we think that we've really drafted a good bylaw, but we're also working on some components. One of the things I will mention that we're trying to work on right now, working with Jenny, is the height clearance of buildings. Right now in our FADS document, that component is fairly onerous because the height is significant. So working with Jenny, we've done some best practice. We've looked at other municipalities. Jenny's worked with her counterparts in other municipalities to understand, okay, well, what is an appropriate number? And, what is going to meet the design criteria of all accessible vehicles? Those types of things are really being considered with this document. And then EV parking. So EV parking, it's definitely something that is new. But we also need to consider it. So in the draft zoning bylaw, I think it's section 5.4, we have requirements right now for certain zones have to have a certain amount of EV parking. So 1% of the total parking spaces required need to be EV. And then one of those spaces also needs to be accessible, right? So we need to have an accessible EV parking space as well. So I just wanted to draw your attention to these specific sections where we're really calling out accessibility. Obviously, we value input from the committee, but obviously focusing in on your mandate. Those are areas that I wanted to highlight. Not saying that the rest of the document can't be commented on, but obviously for the mandate of this committee, I wanted to draw your attention to those sections.
Question.
Are you done with presentation?
No.
No.
You're okay. Hold that one to the end.
Yeah.
Appreciate that. Thank you. So
Yeah, I've got something to ask too.
awesome. So we're almost done. I have 3 more slides here and then we'll get into these questions. So just in terms of, before Miranda gives you an overview of that interactive map that's available on the city's webpage, this is just to show you kind of a visual, and we are working on colors as well. This is the draft that was brought out in November, and we've heard a lot of good public feedback about colors and how we use them and what they mean. And so this is just a draft overview to show you structure, right? We have residential in yellow. We have our intensification corridors, which are really the connective spines between commercial and our urban growth center, right? Those transit-oriented areas in orange. We have our employment in purple, commercials in red, and then we have our institutional uses in blue. But if we look at this schedule, Schedule A, this is the zoning bylaw, and then we pan to the next image. This is our official plan. So you can see how these colors relate, right? They really set the stage for one another, and the documents tie into each other from a land use and zoning standpoint. So next, I'll just kind of conclude with kind of next steps. So as I mentioned, the draft zoning bylaw was released for public review on December 4th. The commenting period really ended at the end of January. However, we continue to meet with advisory committees and external stakeholders. And, I'm getting emails about, the zoning bylaw yesterday, right? So obviously we're continuing to receive comments, and we want this document to be, the best that it can be. So opportunities to meet with this committee here and others, we're continuing to do that. We had our public information session on January 29th, which was great. A little presentation to the public, and then we were able to, have a bit of an open house format where everyone was able to walk around, point at maps, look specifically at their property. In a lot of instances, people come with specific interests about their property, right? Which is important and valid. And then we had all the comments, and the comment date January 31st, but as I mentioned, we're still receiving comments. So the next stage of the project, really, we're going to have our site specifics. So although we have all these zone categories applied across the city, site specifics is basically allowing for certain additional provisions. It might be a specific zone. So I might have a property that's zoned residential, but when I look on a map, it says residential, and then it has a little dash and a 1 or a 2 or a 3. And what that means is there's special exemptions for that site. So it might be allowing an additional use or something like that. So we're working on those. And then really we're looking to bring forward this document in June in a draft form, right? So that'll come forward to committees and council at that point. So those are kind of the timelines. I will also indicate as of March, March 1st, we did a postcard mail out to allow people. Maybe you haven't gotten it yet. I hope you're getting it in the mail soon. It's supposed to go to every resident in the city of Brantford. If you didn't get one, you guys can contact me and we'll make sure you get it. But basically what it's doing is to bring awareness to the zoning bylaw. There's a bit.ly or a link to the mapping, and there's also a QR code where you can scan it with your phone. It'll bring you right to the interactive mapping, which Miranda is going to lead you through right now. And you can check out the zoning of your property, and you can check out the zoning of properties around you. So that's just a little bit of a public awareness. And then also there's been some social media blasts, I think, as of like this week or maybe next week to bring awareness to it as well. So maybe what I'll do now, if we can, I know you guys have some questions and I look forward to answering them. I'll hand it over to Miranda. If Miranda can share her screen, then she'll guide you through how to use the interactive mapping.
I need the ability to share my screen turned on.
Make co-host. Go. Perfect.
Okay, there we go. Good morning or good afternoon. Miranda Ivney, Long Range Planner. So as Josh was mentioning, we have a new interactive mapping tool for the city. So once you've logged in, and I can show you how to get there. So on the zoning bylaws project page on the city's website, there is a hyperlink that's interactive mapping. And if you were to click on that, it will bring you to the map. And if you were looking to figure out what the zone of a particular property was, at the top left-hand corner, you could type in an address, and it will pop up. And once you click it, you'll be redirected to the property. You'll notice on the right-hand side, there's a number of drop-down menus, the first of which will show you what colors are and what that means for the zoning. So here we have a yellow, and this is our, if you click the property, our there we go. This is our neighborhood low-rise zone. And you'll notice that there's 3 letters and numbers associated in brackets for this zone. And so what this means is that the minimum required frontage would be 18 meters, minimum required lot area would be 550 meters, and then the maximum lot coverage would be 35%. A really great tool that we've added in is just below the zoning, you'll see a bylaw link hyperlink. And if you were to click this, it will bring you to the section in our zoning bylaw that lays out all the specific provisions for that zone. So you'll again see here the lot frontage, lot area, and lot coverage has a 1 denoted in these fields. So if you were to scroll down just a little bit, you'll have the explanation where F means frontage and so forth. To figure out what uses are permitted in this zone, you'll need to scroll up a bit, just because there are a number of residential zones. And in the table under the permitted uses, you would look for the heading NLR or neighborhood low rise and see the uses that are permitted indicated by a P. If there is a dash, that use would not be permitted in that particular zone. Now I'll go back to the mapping. If you go to the second drop-down menu underneath, we have a number of layers that you can turn on and off. If you were to turn on the existing zoning bylaw, so 160-90 layer, just give it a quick second to load. It'll tell you what the zone is currently so that you can contrast what is being proposed. So if you were again to click the property, it'll tell you that property is currently zoned residential type 1A. And we have also added in a hyperlink that will take you to the section of the current bylaw so you can more quickly see what uses are changing or if a use is being proposed to be carried forward and or if any of the zoning provisions have changed. And then in addition to that, we have a couple extra layers. Although I will quickly say, if you're looking to access the hyperlink for the current zoning bylaw, you need to the proposed zoning bylaw, you need to make sure that the existing zoning bylaw layer is turned off. It'll provide different options for you. But one other one that I'd like to note quickly is in our current bylaw, if a property is located within a floodplain area, it would previously have an F prefix in the zone code. However, now we've proposed to switch to an overlay to address that. So just lower on the menu, you'll see Schedule B flood draft. And once you turn that on, a blue dashed overlay will pop up and you could then determine if your property was located within that floodplain area. There are a number of other schedules that you can turn on and off, like our source water protection areas, parking exemption areas, and so forth. That's just a high-level overview of the tool. We're really excited about it, and if you have any questions, I'm here available to answer.
Yeah, thanks, Miranda. Appreciate that. So before we hand the floor back to the chair and questions, a couple notes in terms of the document itself. So the bylaw, this hard copy document that I have, and the document that was circulated and attached to the report, the document is not entirely AODA at this point. We are working with the project team and our consultants at SGL to make sure that it is. There are definitely components of it that are accessible, but there are still some things that need to be brought up to our expectations and, you know, Jenny's expectations, making sure that this document is AODA compliant. So with that being said, thanks for the time to present, and yeah, I'll hand it back over.
Thank you, Joshua. May I have a mover and a seconder to place this motion on the floor?
All right.
Yes, Madison and, sorry.
Brian Vanderwood.
Brian Van. Thank you. Questions for either Joshua or Miranda?
That's not a question.
Yes.
Talked about the condos, EV parking. Will that include a charging station?
Sorry, condos.
Well, for townhouses, you're asking for
Any parking lot.
any parking lot that you're saying.
Yep.
Especially with type 1 or type or A or B.
Yep.
Does it include a charging station?
So for in the bylaw, the requirements for EV parking, there are certain types of uses, whether that's residential, commercial. Right now, what we have it is, I believe it's mid-rise, high-rise, and commercial. So depending on the type of built form, yes, there would be a requirement for 1%. Now in its draft form, we're looking at this right now, and we don't know if 1% is actually high enough. Now, when we're talking about single detached dwelling units, sorry?
I think as the future, we need to say, we need to do the best we can, that there is never going to be a second chance at it, basically.
Right. So with that in mind, when we talk about EV parking, if we look at a lot of municipalities outside of Brantford, what they're doing now is they're doing what's called future ready spots, like EV ready spots. So, you know, we have fossil fuel dominated parking lots for the most part today, and we're starting to see a shift towards EV. And certainly with provincial guidance and, you know, some of the changes at that level, we will continue to see EV parking spaces. So what a lot of municipalities are doing is they're requiring when you know, if a site plan goes through for development, that a percentage of the parking spaces are EV right now, and that a portion are future ready. So it means that the infrastructure is put into the ground, and then at some point in the future, they can be converted. Mm-hmm. So when you're talking about condos, that's something that we're looking at.
No, I'm not talking about condos.
Okay. What was your question? I apologize.
EV parking at a townhouse.
Right.
Well, will it have an electric charging station?
Well, right now in the zoning bylaw, we have certain forms. So if it's in the intensification corridor, if it's medium density, then there would be a requirement for certain forms to have it. But some lower density forms, if we're talking about properties out in west of Conklin, there wouldn't be a requirement for it, right? The question or comment on that would be, when we have high density development, often people don't own individual parking spaces on their lot. So we need to ensure that we provide opportunities for EV and require that from a development standpoint. There's a little bit more, and I think the building code used to require it, and I think that that's changed. This is an OBC requirement. For single detached dwellings, you used to be required to put in a certain type of voltage in your parking or in your garage that would allow for EV. So there's a little bit more of an opportunity for those things. I don't know if that's still a requirement now. That's more of an Ontario Building Code piece, not necessarily a zoning bylaw piece. Mm-hmm. But at least for right now, our NLR zone, which is our low rise, does not require it. Our medium and high rise and our commercial, and I think our employment zones as well, require a percentage of the parking to be EV. But again, this is draft, and right now our team is really looking at, you know, other municipalities, because I think 1%, although it's relative to the number of parking spaces, I think we could probably look at an increased percentage. So again, it's draft, it's up for review. And if the group has comments on that, specifically from an accessibility standpoint, we are requiring one of the EV spaces to be accessible, which I think is in line with best practice in other municipalities, if not a little bit ahead.
So there's a new project at 677 Park Road. It's 150 living units, okay, and they all seem to have a garage.
Right.
So if they have an EV, they have to put it in their garage. There's no public parking. If you have a visitor, he wants to charge his car, it's not available.
Okay.
Is that right?
Yeah, so in terms of, this is a proposed zoning bylaw. So the proposed zoning bylaw is not in effect. This is in a draft format. 160-90, our current zoning bylaw, that document I was saying, it's 30 years old. That zoning bylaw is in place. It does not outline EV. It's an older document, right?
I understand that.
So newer developers, if they choose to, 32 Norman, for example, next to the new fire hall, they have 4 EV spaces that are common use EV, right? So newer builders are starting to do this. There's another development on North Park where they're actually looking at 25% future ready spots. So it is something that newer developers are thinking. This bylaw is not in place yet. When it is in place, EV would be required.
Yeah, I don't want it left out.
Certainly.
The requirements for EV charging.
Yeah, certainly. So I think the development you're talking about has already advanced under the current zoning bylaw. So this zoning bylaw is not in place yet, but certainly from a development standpoint, right? You see developers even without these types of regulations starting to do that because they're buyers, right? They want these things. Even people who don't own fossil fuel cars, people who own fossil fuel cars, they want the option in the future for an EV opportunity, right? So.
Yes, Councillor Hunt, please.
Thank you, and through you to Joshua. So I'm trying to overlay the current percentage requirement for accessible parking stalls with the requirement for 1% EV, and one of those spaces must be an accessible EV. What I don't want to see is that we're taking away from our current number of accessible stalls, which is in most parking lots still deficient based on the number of persons with accessible parking permits. So can you speak to that?
Yeah, sure. I think it would be considered in addition to. We can definitely look at this and Councillor, sorry, through the chair, Councillor, I can definitely follow up with you to confirm that. I don't think the goal would be to lose that space by any means. That's not the intent. It's to create that additional opportunity to make sure that these spaces are accessible and EV, because it is an opportunity that we're looking at. And like I said, it's something that we need to prepare ourselves for, but that we also need to create opportunities for everyone to have access to EV. So it's something that we looked at, but definitely not the intent to lose a space in that process.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and if you could get back to me on that, because actually I've done a fair bit of consulting on the new zoning bylaw project. This is the first time the accessible EV parking has come up, and I just want to make sure that we've got our designated accessible spots, which are a percentage that are required. And so I make sure that accessible EV spot would be in addition to the current requirements, not taking away from the current requirements, especially the type A and type B stalls.
Correct. Yes, okay, certainly. And just for everyone's benefit, that's section 5.14, and then accessible parking is under 5.4 as well. But through the chair, Councillor, I will certainly follow up with you on this. Again, it's not our intent to lose that parking space, and if it is, it's something we would be looking to make sure is called out.
All right, thank you.
Yes.
Through the chair, I apologize if I missed this, but I read through the document and I was wondering if it's possible with the zoning bylaw to have a provision specifically for finished grade and building entrance, maybe most importantly in mixed use zones like downtown for ease of access rather than having like a step and then the entrance to the building? Is that something that can be outlined in the zoning bylaw? Or?
Yeah, so I think in terms of the zoning bylaw and understanding how this tool would work, we do have a general provisions section, but in terms of some of the documents that, you know, our colleague Jenny would rely on, if it's FADs or if there's certain design standards, we would be really looking at those on a site plan basis and have that opportunity to come at that stage. The zoning bylaw, we have this task where we want to provide prescriptive guidelines, but the uniqueness of every site plan and every application that comes through, we also have to be careful there. So we rely on other tools, right, that we will use. So I think that might be a very specific detail that we would refer to site plan. And I know that Jenny comments at site plan and those tools, and obviously ensuring that it meets accessible provincial regulations, right?
Thank you.
I could just add to that, Madam Chair.
Yes.
In terms of the mapping that Miranda just showed, in terms of the flood zone, there's certain parameters that are established by the Grand River Conservation Authority where you can't build below that water table or that floodplain area. So there may be some instances, as Josh has explained, where you may have to build up, but these are on a site-by-site basis through development approvals. We would look at that. Jenny would comment and ensure that if there is something of a step up, that there is provisions in place for that specific development to provide any kind of accessible ramp, etc.
Thank you.
Well, yeah.
Yes.
I've been working on a lot of issues with accessibility, and some of them, like when we're talking about the parking spots. I've been dealing with that, and it was approved at Service Ontario in 2015 that there would be a different system, such as permits for all people with disabilities, and have the wider spots. Anybody that needs an aid to exit and enter their car can use those white spots with a permit. And there was also the proposal made of regular size spots for people with invisible disabilities that should also have a permit to make it legal that they can park in those narrow spots, because the abuse is enormous. And that was approved in 2015 at Service Ontario, and they phoned me and they said it was a monetary issue. I've gone back to Bauma's office, MP here in Brantford, many times, and I have given them the whole copy of the file, and they have not done anything about it. Until last week, they weren't answering my calls. Until last week, somebody else phoned and asked why they weren't answering my calls. So now they've called, and hopefully we can look into that, because I think that will be all a good thing for, I have lived in the world with a husband disabled for over 50 years. So I know what it's like, you know, it's frustrating, but it's things that can be better because that makes it more honest, you know. And I think as we go forward, because you've probably seen it all. You've probably seen people parking and they jump out of the truck and away they go. And that would eliminate that, at least up to a point. And I think that is basically, you know, not at great expense, but that's what they said, is anything we change for the better with EV and this and that all costs money. But we have to just say, listen, this is going to help the people with disabilities live a little more normal, a little easier to approach, you know?
Yeah, good points, very good points. Thank you so much for that.
Thank you, welcome.
Next question from Jen Sawicki, please.
Hi, I just wanted to speak to the different types of parking stalls, and I think that will address your concern. So currently the legislation calls for type A and type B, as both Josh and Joe have alluded to. And the type A stalls are the wider stalls for those which are signed van accessible and are meant for those who require mobility devices for loading and offloading. The type A stalls, which there's an equal amount of, as per the legislation, is more to what you're speaking of, which is the limited mobility or invisible disabilities. Both are permitted, but that's why there are those two stalls required at each site moving forward. And that has been in place since 2016.
Thank you, Jen. Appreciate it. Any further discussion?
See, that was approved, eh?
And sorry, Jenny, it's Joe here. And with those two stalls that you just mentioned, you also tend to require specific signage in front of those parking stalls, correct?
Yes, the type A requires that van signage, van accessible signage. And then the type A just is a typical Ministry of Transportation accessible sign.
And so working with Jenny, we've included that into the zoning bylaw. So that's section 5.4 B and C. So we talk about the signage, we talk about marked with van accessible signage in accordance with the, Access for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. And so those have been called out now. So we get that right up front, and some additional guidance for your team, Joe, in development too. And so, yeah, good point.
Sorry, just a point of clarification. Those signs are marked A and B? I'm
No,
sorry.
through the chair. The only difference would be both would have that Ministry of Transportation typical accessibility signage. Yes. The only difference is the addition of the van sign on the type A stalls, which doesn't mean you technically have to have a van to park there, but it does denote the wider space.
Oh, thank you. Any further discussion?
Anything we can talk about building codes at all or not? No, okay.
Okay, then I will call for the vote. All those in favor of putting the motion forward? And any opposed? Seeing none, that is carried. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Moving on to 5 consent items. We'll now move on to the consent items. 5.1. May I have a mover and a seconder to approve the minutes of our last meeting? Yes, thank you. And a seconder, thank you, Brian. Is there any discussion on the minutes? Thank you. Thank you. Seeing none, all those in favor of accepting the minutes as written? Any opposed? Thank you, that's carried. Resolutions, we have no resolutions at this time. Number 7, notices of motion. There are no resolutions or notices of motion. And we're down to number 8, adjournment. This meeting is now adjourned. Thank you all, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great day.
Good. Interesting.